whatever this is today. So Wednesday, where are we? Wednesday the 6th of August. Now, my last broadcast got cut off short, so I'm hoping that you guys are able to watch all the way through. This is not going to be a long broadcast, incidentally. It's going to be pretty short. There are only two things I really want to talk about today. And the first one is the, I think, surprising numbers of SNP MSPs who've decided not to stand in the next general election for Holyrood. Now, there's a lot of speculation about why this has happened, and I mentioned Kate Forbes in a broadcast the other day, but I think Kate Forbes has a fairly clear and unambiguous reason for not wanting to stand for re-election, and that is she has a young family. She has a daughter who's 3. So I think anybody who's a parent out there would understand the compulsion felt by any parent to spend as much time as possible with a very young child. So fair enough. But that doesn't explain the 39% of current MSPs under the SNP banner who are not planning to stand for re-election. Now, a lot of these are senior figures, and they are basically bailing out of politics, some for other careers. And notably, I think Mary Black is heading towards a stand-up comedy career, fair enough. But it doesn't really explain why now. Now, I did some deep digging and some other research into other pro-independence parties to compare with the SNP to see how many of their current MSPs are planning to not stand for re-election. And I looked at both ALBA, and I looked at the Greens, and I looked also at the ISP. And what's interesting about it is none of them, none of these parties are seeing this exodus of sitting MSPs. Nobody from the smaller parties is planning to stand down and not seek re-election. So this is a problem that's unique to the SNP. And I think my spider sense tells me that, as well as the obvious reasons of people wanting to spend time with their families for real, which is, a real thing, some of them will do that, there's a large percentage of, I would say, more established figures who decided not to stand for re-election. Now, this could be interpreted, if you were being critical, which I'm going to be in this instance, as a sign that the MSPs currently under John Swinney's administration do not support his current so-called 3-point plan for independence. And this is a 3-point plan which contains no actual information on how the SNP plans to actually achieve independence. It's just a wish list. It's a lot of waffle and basically political speak, which really doesn't say anything other than we'd like independence and we're going to seek a Section 30 order, and if you all vote for us in enough numbers, we'll have so much weight behind this that the British state will just crumble, and then we'll have to accept that we need another referendum and give us that Section 30 order. But no matter how you look at it, and no matter which way you slice this, seeking another Section 30 order does not produce a binding referendum. It's advisory only, and it's controlled by the British state. They run it. They decide the rules, they decide who can stand, they decide the franchise, etc., etc., etc. There would need to be negotiations between the Scottish government and the British government about how it be run, and they're never going to do it because they got a real scare the last time when David Cameron granted in inverted commas permission from the UK to hold a referendum on independence. We all know how that worked out. But we also know that in 2015, the following year's general election, the SNP wiped out just about all of the unionist parties from their positions within the Scottish grouping, if you like, at Westminster. And they had 56 SNP MPs at Westminster, which should, by rights, according to the Thatcher Doctrine, have been not just a mandate for independence, it should have resulted in independence, and yet it didn't. Anyway, that's the problem at the moment that I see, that the SNP's current crop of MSPs, large proportion of them, do not seem to support John Swinney's current plan, right? And it's not a plan, it's a wish list, let's face it. No, nobody in the SNP has proposed anything remotely like a plan. Now, before you all jump on me and say, but, there is a submission from the branch membership of the SNP to put independence front and centre in their campaign for re-election to Holyrood next year. But again, it doesn't specify how that should be done. It just says they should do it, and that the leadership should accept that there is a strong desire for this and they need to do something about it. But again, it's not really defined all that clearly. So the SNP clearly has a confidence problem within its own ranks. And despite the fact that many of these individuals will be retiring from politics permanently just because they want to retire or spend time with their families, and nobody would dispute that, there must be also an element of those who don't hold with John Swinney's plans. It's as if he wants to manage his way to independence by managing the minutiae of the Scottish political system, so that he shows good governance and that Scotland runs pretty well, considering it's underfunded by Westminster and they take 40% of our taxes from us and we never see them again. So we're in the same old situation with the Swinney plan. It's just the Sturgeon doctrine, but with a new person running it. Well, I say new. John Swinney's hardly new, is he? So that's a problem. But ALBA and the ISP and the Greens themselves, all of three of those parties, there's only one person that I've seen who might not be standing for re-election or might not want to be selected as a candidate, and that's actually who's I going to say this is actually one of the co-leaders of the Green Party. That's Patrick Harvey, who says that he may not stand. But that's it. None of the other smaller parties are doing this. So this is an SNP problem. It's a problem of confidence, and it's basically people saying, can't be bothered, just don't want to do it anymore. And you can see that they're weary, they're not seeing anything new. And it's a shame, because unless the SNP reinvents itself and double quick, and remember there's less than a year to go before this next general election, there's not much hope for the SNP to keep some of the seats that they currently have. They're going to lose some because people are going to be turned off by this in the same way that 39% of the sitting MSPs have become disillusioned. That disillusionment, that doubt starts to seep in. It's corrosive. It's not good for confidence. They need to take it in hand, and I think John Swinney is just not the man to do that. Anyway, there is some good news recently. It was announced this morning, interestingly online, but the British Civil Aviation Authority has granted the very first ever space launch license to a Scottish rocket builder called Skyrotor, which has a manufacturing base, if I remember correctly, near Cumbernauld, and is also headquartered in Edinburgh. So Skyrotor has got the very first license to launch a rocket from Scottish soil. Now, of course, the media is saying a British rocket launching company is launching from British soil, because they would say that, wouldn't they? But we know that this is a Scottish-based company, and it has developed a 3-stage small-scale rocket launcher, which is capable of putting small satellites into what's known as a polar orbit, which basically goes over the top of the world, over the North Pole, under the South Pole. And access to this kind of orbit is actually quite lucrative. Their first launch is not going to be into orbit because they're using a sort of intermediate size rocket for this launch, but it is planned to launch it vertically straight up above what's known as the Kármán line, which is the recognized division between the atmosphere and space. It's looking like it will get to about 135 kilometers altitude, which is well into the vacuum of space before returning to Earth and perhaps being recovered. The launch site for this is Saxiford in Shetland, and this is the first launch license granted for that spaceport. And again, it's another Scottish success story. No matter how the British state wants to badge this, this is a Scottish rocket company launching from a Scottish launch site. And that is important because Scotland will become one of the smallest nations in the world to have its own space program with its own launch site and with its own indigenous launcher firms. And it might not seem a big deal to most of you because there are so many other problems that we have to deal with down here on the planet, but it is important to Scottish technology companies, because once rocket launches start happening on a regular basis, then there will be other companies which will be manufacturing parts and satellites and other things to go on these rockets. And Glasgow is already recognised as the city which probably manufactures the most satellites in Europe, certainly, if not in the larger world. So we already have a good space industry. We just didn't have a launcher company which had a license to launch from Scottish soil. Now we do. There is another rocket company competing with Skyrover called Orbex, which is based in Forres in the northeast, and they also have a novel launcher of a similar size which uses a different fuel. Both rocket companies run their rockets on either recycled material or recycled fuels, or on low carbon fuels. So both of these rockets are much more green than you might expect. As far as I remember, the Orbex rocket runs on a form of, I think it's propane they use. I'll check that, but I think it's liquefied propane and oxygen. Could be wrong. People from Orbex will probably correct me. The Skyrover rocket runs on liquid oxygen and a fuel which they call ecocene, which is a form of kerosene which is distilled from waste polystyrene and plastic cups, something which we all hate, right? So both companies are novel. Both companies are competing in this vertical launch market for polar orbits, and both Orbex and Skyrover are both Scottish. That's very, very important to emphasize. We have two space launch companies. We have a launch site that's active. We have a launch license to launch Scottish-built satellites and Scottish-built rockets from a Scottish launch site. And no matter how the British state tries to rebadge this as British, can't take away from the fact that this is a Scottish technological achievement. And I want to emphasize that because we don't hear enough good news these days. If only our politicians were as enterprising and as courageous as the people in these rocket companies are. They have clear ambitions, they know what they're doing, there's a process involved. They will do a few of these very high vertical launches. These are sometimes called sounding rockets because they go straight up, they don't go to orbit. But the aim after that is then to develop the full-scale launcher, which is capable then of placing satellites in polar orbits where the Earth can be studied. And this is very important for environmental studies because polar orbits allow you to scan the entire surface of the planet from a single platform orbiting across the poles. Very, very important for protecting the environment. So, all good news. As I say, it's just a great shame that John Swinney and his party seem to have completely lost all sense of direction at the moment. And I hope to God that they do manage eventually to change the leadership and to change direction before the next general election. That's it from me today. I hope you have managed to see the whole show. I have been scooting around Glasgow with the phone switched off in an effort to try and evade the kind of tracking that tends to go on when I do my broadcasts, and this hasn't happened since 2018, but there are some external interference factors disrupting some of my broadcasts. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. As I always say, keep the faith. But remember, Scotland's got a lot of potential. And it's not just shipbuilding, it's not just oil and gas, it's in space as well. And we're really, really good at it. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.